I think some of the more successful offices are offices which have consciously kept their numbers under control.
I think we architects are not business people, unfortunately. There is a dichotomy between being an architectural professional and running a practice.
Right. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Blueprints. It's great to have you on the show. Today on the show, we have architect Sohrab Dalal and architect Sonali Bhagwati. Both today run DPA. Originally, they started off as a couple running Spazzio, which merged with DesignPlus to now form DPA or DesignPlus Architecture. They're extremely passionate about architecture, the role of architecture in urban planning, especially the city of Delhi. Both of them have worked with international partners on collaborative projects across India and are one of the top architectural firms in the country today. They have won numerous awards for their work and are a couple who've been married to each other and working in the same space for 35 years. This conversation has been extremely enlightening for me, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it as well. If you like this content, don't forget to press the like, subscribe, and share button. Welcome, and thank you for coming on to our show. And it's a great pleasure having you here. And it's a beautiful house that you have.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you for inviting us to the show.
So let's get to know both of you a little bit. So can I just, start off? How did you all meet, and how's your life journey been together?
So I'll go first.
Yeah.
So Sohrab and I met, of course, at architecture school.
Right.
But I have to say that when I walked into architecture school, my very first day, the two guys I saw sitting right there under the tree was Sohrab Dalal and my other friend Mohit Gujral. And I mean, since then I have known Sohrab. Means I was 17 years old when I went to architecture school. And it's funny because one I married and the other one was somebody we worked with for a very long time, So very, very long and very strong bonds were formed since then.
Yeah, so that's as Sonali said, we met at architecture school. And I think it's a bit of fate because I was not really meant to be at architecture school. All my life I thought I'd do engineering. And the results that year were late at BITS Pilani. Right. So I had to spend 6 months doing something. A friend of mine was going to Ahmedabad for the architecture school exam, so I decided to go along with him from Bombay. And I got into the school, and I did this for 6 months. And then 6 months later, my dad, who was an engineer also, rang up and said, it's time now to go to Pilani. And I said, I don't want to go. I'd spent 6 months, studying architecture. And I suddenly realized that maybe I had blinkers on because, my dad being an engineer, I was always wanting to be an engineer. But once I actually experienced architecture for 6 months, I didn't feel like leaving. So I stayed on. And if I'd gone, then I don't think the two of us would have met.
Because I joined the year later.
Yeah,
so you were a bad junior too.
She was a bad junior, yeah. That's why I was sitting on the steps looking at all the new entrants, Mohit and I coming in. And
whom to trouble, whom not to.
Yes, absolutely.
So how did that go down with your dad when you told him that?
No, my dad was very flexible. I mean, I think he was I think he was fairly forward thinking. Yes, I think he would have loved me to be an engineer. But he understood that it's best I do what I want to do.
Right.
And I think that's what always is a recipe for success. And then, in fact, later I used to joke with him after I became an architect. And whenever we saw a bad building, I'd say, Dad, that's probably designed by an engineer. And if it was a good building, I'd say, that's designed by an architect. So it was a nice cordial relationship.
Right. And the two of you started dating in college, or was it much later?
We started dating, I think, 1 week later. We went to see a movie. Sohrab asked me to come for a movie. So we went to see a movie and I bunked a class and he bunked a double class to go for that movie. And I think since then we sort of started dating. And
I don't know how you really define dating. I'm still a little confused.
Because in architecture school we were always all together. We were like a group.
Right.
Yeah, we were a small group of some good friends, maybe 6 or 8 good friends. Yeah. And we'd do everything together. But of course, even within that group, a certain alliances sort of emerged. So yeah, it happened, I think, as a process right through architecture school. And I think by the time we finished architecture school, uh, again, we did, I went to it to study, to work in Australia for a year. Sonali went to Paris, but we kept in touch. And, I think there was definitely, we knew that there was something brewing, but popped the question many, many years later.
Moving a little forward, and we'll come back to this question a little later on how it's worked out for you guys over the years. But you mentioned you went to Australia and then you went to Paris. How was that experience for both of you, and what did you learn from that?
So I went to Paris on a scholarship,
Right.
and it was like for us, whatever opportunities came, we just grabbed them,
Right.
And it was something. I went to a country which I'm talking about 80s.
Yeah.
Okay, so nobody spoke English. It was very, very French. Today, it's not the same. And I went into an architectural office where the maximum English that was spoken was about 2 sentences in a row. And the only other person who actually spoke good English was my boss. So it was, for me, more than just architectural learning. It was a life learning experience, because I was out finding places to stay for myself. I was out going to different places, meeting people, learning architecture and terms which were so different for me. The systems over there were different, because you see, in 80s, India was a very different place. Today, there would be very little difference between, let's say, an Indian school of architecture and elsewhere.
Or even a practice.
But 80s was like day and night. So it was a whole learning experience. And then for me, what was really important is I wanted to integrate with them. I wanted to integrate and enjoy the place. So I was so determined. I made a full-on effort to learn the language. I knew a little bit of French, but I could ask a question but never understood the answer. So it was a wonderful experience. People around me were very nice. They also went all out to teach me.
Right.
So I learned what I call the spoken French. I never learned the correct French, And I think it was a wonderful learning experience. I met some awful people also, but that's part and parcel of life,
And that's everywhere, right?
That's everywhere. So for me, it was more than architecture, a life learning experience. And I really enjoyed it.
Wow. And what about you? And
No, so, in my case, I think it was a little easier because I was living with family. I was living with an aunt and uncle in Sydney. So that part wasn't difficult. They also spoke English, but also a little difficult to understand the English they spoke. But it wasn't French, so it was definitely easier. And but the office I worked in, I think, was very interesting. One of the partners, it was an office called Meldrum Burrows and Partners, and Bill Burrows, who was one of the partners, had actually worked on the Sydney Opera House project also. So I think that's a very fascinating project, and we heard he gave us some very interesting, behind the scenes stories about, the whole project and how it happened. So it was, from the professional point of view, I thought very exciting. Also, I think what happens is that I think at least in those days, some of these international offices, they took internships a little more seriously than we do in this country. Till many years ago, many years ago, an intern did very, very sort of, I would say, in a sense, menial work in an office if they were an intern. Whereas here, I think there was a great effort by the office to actually try and educate the interns, and actually teach them what the profession is all about, which is what really an internship should be. So I think they take it a little more seriously. So I was lucky to be able to avail of that. And I think one learned a lot about the profession, I think one learned a lot about how the profession operates in a different environment, because Australia was very different from India. So I think professionally it was a great experience, and of course I was, as I said, living with family, so that wasn't difficult at all. But I think this is actually, I think, a good initiative. The School of Architecture in Ahmedabad, they actually insist that you work for 6 months in an office as part of your fourth year
Right.
in the program, and some students are able to sort of do this at international locations. So I think it's a good part of the course actually.
When the two of you started out professionally, did you ever imagine that you would do the projects that you've done and the scale that you've done and the type of organization that you've built? Was that a conscious call or decision of getting to the scale, or what did it just kind of naturally happen?
I'll tell you, I think we architects are not business people,
Right.
unfortunately. I think to run a good successful organization, I think we need to be able to do a MBA to be
Or hire an
efficient,
MBA.
or hire an MBA, which neither of us can. We can afford that, and we don't have the time to do an MBA.
Right.
So I think there is a sort of a dichotomy between being an architectural professional and running a practice.
Right.
So this is a very, very tough question and a tough job,
Right.
No, but I think I think you digressed a bit. I think to answer your question, did we have a plan? The answer would be no. Part of the reason is what Sonali said. I think we sort of took it one step at a time. You don't. I think the first few jobs you get are either through acquaintances or somebody's willing to have their project designed by somebody who's relatively inexperienced.
Right.
So you get your first few jobs that way, and I think we were lucky we got this thing. But then after that, I think it's the work that you've done, even if it's a small project. It's the work that you've done which starts getting you the future projects. So so I think we took it a step at a time, and we did. I think for the first 10-12 years, we took a conscious decision to never let the office grow more than about 30 people. We found that to be the sweet spot.
Oh, really?
We didn't want to have a very large office, and then of course things changed, and we'll talk about that later. But we consciously kept it at about 30 people because I think there are a couple of advantages. I think when you're at about 25, 30 people, it's more, everybody is more like a family, in the sense that you know each other,
the families.
Yeah, and so I think you can really get much better work done by the people when you have that sort of an atmosphere. When it becomes very large and commercial, I think it loses that sort of personal touch.
Right.
And then then even the person working for you treats it more as an organization, And I don't think that's really the best thing. I think some of the more successful offices are offices which have sort of consciously kept their numbers under control.
Also, I think as the country was, the way the economy and the country was, there was just that scale of projects.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think the largest scale of projects that we are talking about has happened only in the last 15 years or
Right.
so.
And a lot of that is government work now, and there are certain reasons why in the past we have done or not done government work. And with the developers, who we did a lot of work for, the sizes grew over time. So when we first stepped out, 100,000 square foot project would look like a very large project.
Right.
Today, we may not even look at 100,000 square foot project sometimes. Depending.
Right.
It's not only the size, but it's also the type of project that normally dictates whether we really say yes or no. So it's I think, as Sonali was saying, I think the market has evolved, and maybe as it's evolved, firms have also had to change and adapt to that
And
change.
I think firms have had to grow from being design studios to design practices.
Right. So, what's the mindset shift that is required if someone wants to make the transition from running a boutique firm into a much larger project, into a much larger practice? In your opinion, what's the mindset shift that needs to happen?
So, in fact, this happened with us.
Yeah, and I was going to get that.
So, what happened was that in 2010, so the company was called Spazzio
Yeah.
up to 2010. And in 2010, we got this opportunity to, Sonali mentioned this friend of ours, Mohit Gujral, who was an architect and a close friend and, somebody we had sort of indirectly worked with before. So in 2000, so Mohit had started a firm. Actually, it was started by his father, Satish Gujral, but Mohit sort of took the firm forward, and his firm was called DesignPlus.
Right.
And and Mohit took a decision to join DLF in 2010 as vice chairman in one of their companies. And at that point, took a call to merge the two firms. So Spazzio merged with DesignPlus.
Right.
And
it became DesignPlus Architecture.
DesignPlus Architecture.
Or eventually DPA.
Yeah.
Right.
So actually what happened was that suddenly, we were about maybe 40 odd people in Spazzio at that time. Mohit was about 60, 65 people. So suddenly from 40, we became 105,
Yeah.
Now, I knew this was going to happen. I mean, once we decided to do the merger. And actually, we took a conscious call to do it. For me, it was really a completely new challenge because, we'd been managing firms of this size, 30, 35, and suddenly there was a firm of 105. And I wanted to understand what the differences were.
It wasn't an organically grown.
No, it wasn't. It was suddenly A plus B.
It was A plus B.
Yeah,
so
so
there were
over a
cultural
period of few
differences.
months.
There were cultural differences. So there were HR issues. There were issues on how do you now break up the teams. How do you we suddenly needed to scout for work of a particular size to be able to sustain an office of 100 odd people.
And while maintaining the quality of work that you are known for, both firms were known for.
But as I said, it was a conscious decision, and I personally I was looking on it as a challenge and also a new experience. In 2010, we'd already been in practice for 25 years, 85 to 25 years. So I think it was an opportunity to reinvent ourselves in a way.
Also, what was important for this merger is that both. Besides the fact that Sohrab and Mohit have been childhood friends, the way Mohit ran his firm in terms of ethics and the way we ran our firm in terms of ethics was exactly the same. So there were no differences in terms of our attitudes, in terms of the integrity with which we would run a firm. Right. So both of us were completely at par with each other. And these were the basic values which sort of enabled us to merge. The other things were more nuts and bolts, what Sohrab is saying, where you had to look for more work. It's a bigger firm, so HR issues, all that. But the whole crux of what we wanted to do in terms of ethics, integrity, quality was exactly the same.
Also, I think what helped was that the project types were similar. So Mohit did a certain amount of developer work,
right,
and a certain amount of work with corporates and private clients. The only difference was he didn't do much interior design work.
Right.
And interior design has always been an integral part of DPA, or Spazzio earlier and now DPA. So I think that was the only difference. So again, the skills of the people that we inherited were also similar and very useful for the type of work that we were doing. So I think that also was something that helped because we both did similar types of projects.
At any point during that journey, and I'm very intrigued on this because from business family I've seen M&As work and M&As not work at all. At any point, did you ever feel like we've bitten off a little bit more than we could chew?
Yeah, many times. As I said, I think one of the more serious challenges were the HR challenges. Because there were people that had been with Mohit, and obviously to that extent were very sort of faithful and loyal to him. But Mohit was no longer part of the equation at all, because once he joined DLF, in fact, Mohit became a client, because
Right.
we went on to do a huge amount of work for DLF also. So and then there were people who were with us. So I think bridging the two offices was a bit of a challenge, and sometimes it became a little frustrating, because sometimes egos come in the way, and neither Sonali nor I really have an ego, so we couldn't understand why some of these people had egos really. So those were.
How do you deal with that?
So, well, actually, I think you just, I think what I
And you have to talk it out to people. You have to keep connecting and engaging with various people.
And Sonali talked about management and doing an MBA, but what I've got to come to realize is that a lot of management is common sense,
Yeah.
And I think if you just think things through and apply common sense, even problems which are not purely architectural in nature, can get resolved. So that's what we did, and yes, we did take external help where we felt it was necessary.
In fact, a little thing that in our original Spazzio office, everybody was always on first name basis. Sohrab was Sohrab, Sonali, blah blah. Everybody was first name basis. Nobody was sir or ma'am at all.
Right.
But in Mohit's office, it was
Sirs and
ma'ams,
Yeah.
and we inherited that. And even today, I tell that, listen, I don't want to be called ma'am. I'm Sonali. Period.
Yeah. So anyway, I think
Yeah.
there are some challenges, but as I said, it was a conscious decision,
Right.
and it was a conscious decision to also learn what how to run a larger firm, and it was sort of it's something that happened very easily. It's not that we grew from 35 to 40 and then 60 and then
Right.
80. It just happened in one stroke.
Coming closer to the end of the show, I want to understand how your journey as a couple has been. I've been saving this for the end. How has that journey been?
That's the difficult part. Before this, everything was easy, actually.
No, I'll tell you.
Please.
We were working together,
Right.
at least 3 or 4 years before we got married.
Okay.
And when we started working together, we had this clear understanding that if a project comes to me, it is my project and I will deal with it, whatever happens, If it comes to him, it is his project and he will deal with it.
Or even if it came to the firm, we would decide who was better suited to take up that project, And
how long did it take for you all to realize that this is the combination?
I think very soon.
Yeah.
Almost immediately.
So we discuss each other's projects a lot,
Yeah.
But if she has a different opinion on a project that she's looking at, then the final say is hers, even if I've said whatever I had to say.
Right.
And vice versa. So, I mean, we definitely take each other's inputs, but the final decision, and I think that's worked well. And also because we don't really ever work jointly on a project. I think the only way we would work jointly on a project was if we were doing, say, for example, if we are doing a hotel, and we're doing it right through architecture and interior design, then maybe I would work on the architecture if it was a larger hotel, and Sonali would work on the interior design. But otherwise, our projects are normally, we look at projects separately.
So this is the understanding we started working with, and getting married was just a formality because Sohrab and I had known each other for 10 years before we got married. So I mean, getting married was like, okay, today we are working, tomorrow we've got married, day after we are working again. So it was something like that, I mean, we had been going on holidays together for 10 years before that. Right. So there was like honeymoon was what? A holiday. That's it. There was nothing different about that holiday than any other holiday.
It's one of the formalities that just had to be done at some point in life.
One of the boxes that had to be ticked.
Yeah, one of the boxes that had to be ticked. Very interesting. But I believe you both were covered in a matrimonial show recently.
Yes.
How was that experience?
No, matrimonial show in the sense that it's
A matrimonial company.
Yeah, it was a
it's a company that does both education and matrimony. It's an interesting concept. But I think one of the things that they wanted to look at were couples that were in the same profession,
Right.
and had so what were the challenges working, some of the similar questions that you just
Right.
spoke about. And it was an interesting conversation
I
like
think
this.
being married to a person in your own profession has, according to me, more advantages than disadvantages, because I think first of all you understand each other perfectly. Secondly, you've got to be best friends before you get married.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. And best friends are people who respect each other. So that's the fundamental.
Right.
And when we travel, we both want to do the same things. It's not that he wants to do this and I want to do that. Our interests are the same. We want to look at architecture. We want to look at new projects. We want to learn from that. That's just part and parcel of our travel agenda.
Right.
We want to buy the same things. We want, everything that we want in that sense is completely synchronized.
Yeah, because what Sonali was saying is true, that for us a very important part of any holiday is really the experience of going to either some of the historic architecture that may be there at that particular place, or even some of the modern architecture. In fact, modern architecture is something that interests both of us a lot. So it also just so happens that a lot of the new buildings that are built overseas are museums. So
Right.
you actually visit the museum. For example, I'll give you an example. We went to the museum in Abu Dhabi, where I thought what they had in the museum, whatever they house in the museum, was fairly ordinary. It was sort of nothing so exciting, but the building itself was spectacular. So we actually went back to the same building a second time, not because we wanted to see the content, but because we wanted to go back and experience the building a second time. So I think if say Sonali was a lawyer, which she would never be, and if I was an architect, we would we may not have done some of these things when we traveled together. So it's a nice
also,
fit.
if Sohrab is working late or I am late, there would never be any kind of friction as to why are you late or why aren't you, so there are so many things which are part of your life, which you understand each other for.
Right.
So I think that's what is important, because I have an older sister who's a lawyer, who's married to a lawyer,
Right.
and another older sister who's a doctor and married to a doctor.
Okay.
And I just see it perfectly synchronized.
I have so I've been married now for it's going to be 13 years in January. We got married when we were 23, me and my wife, and we were best friends before we got married. We continue to be best friends. But we made a call day one that we will never be in the same workplace together, because we needed both. She works and I work in family businesses. She's still associated with her family's business, and we said we need a vent outlet, and if we just end up going at each other at work, is never going to be.
No, but
we don't work with each other.
Right.
So we don't even go to the office together.
We may sit in the same physical space,
right?
And that too. Again, I'm supposed to be at the other office, which I don't go to too often because it's in Delhi. But so we're actually, in that sense, not working with each other.
Right.
We're not physically. We try and have lunch together every day.
But does work tend to come home with you in the night?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and that may be one of the downsides.
Right.
But I think that would happen even if we were in different professions. Maybe if we were both working, like again, if she was a lawyer and I was an architect, and there was some things that had to be completed in the evening, she would bring that home in the evening.
But the difference would have been that we would not have understood what each other is doing. Here we bring it home, but we understand each other. So that's the difference.
You mentioned about modern architecture. Interesting. Have you been to Oslo?
Yeah.
The library there?
Yes,
One of-
beautiful.
Yeah.
One
I
of
was
our
there
favorite,
last
one
year.
of our
Our favorite
food
buildings.
You see,
Yeah.
because it, in fact, it really, I think the brief, the program is what is fantastic about that building. It's not the architecture, of course, is
Yeah.
stunning, but the program that it's big. It's much more than a library today.
Yeah.
So when we went there were
Very
people.
experiential, right?
Yeah, there were
Yeah.
people sitting and doing yoga.
Yeah.
There were people sitting and stitching.
And
There were people
there was
making-
that game that.
and there was a
yeah.
place for young kids
Yeah.
to run around. So I think as a program, it was.
I think it was one of a truly public place.
Yeah.
And public in its true sense,
Yeah.
with everything happening.
I was there in Oslo last year, and it was the end of our trip, and it was raining, and we asked the guide in the morning. We'd done a walking tour, and the second half of the day was rain, and he said, it's going to be raining the second half. What do we do? I said, your best bet is to go to the Oslo library. Have you lost your mind? Who goes to a library? Yaar, kitab nahi
True.
padhne mujhe.
True.
Like, I read a lot, but like, that's not what I want to do on a
That's not
holiday.
what you want to do on a
Right?
trip.
And to go to a library.
Yeah.
I said, no, you must go to the library. And we didn't go once, we ended up going twice in the 3 days
So
that we were there.
we were with a group of friends, and we went there one evening to the library, and we spent a couple of hours, and we liked it so much that we told the others, and they also had a fairly tight next day the program, but some of them did manage to go to the library, and they said exactly the same reaction, that why go to a library, but they also, when they went there, realized what an experience it was. So it's a great project. I think that is actually really the most important ingredient, in the sense that that's how you can tell a project whether it's been successful or not, is by the people who use it. So one of the nicest things that I enjoy is when I go back to Thakur University, and we go there almost every few months, because we're still doing a lot of projects there, and you talk to the students. So we did this block of 6 hostels, boys hostels, and we did the learning center. So when you talk to the people who are using your buildings, and the feedback that you get from them is one of the very satisfying sort of moments of a project, and these boys were telling us that they said that who were living in these hostels, that today, because of social media, everything is so, they communicate with students in the south, in Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, and everybody's posting pictures about the living environment that they are living in at these various universities. And they said, so many people from some of the other universities were so appreciative of the sort of facilities that they had at this university. So it's nice. It's nice to get that feedback.
I would love to visit and have.
No, it's always lovely to go back to your project and see it grow. Both of us get very invested in our projects. Even if it's an office which I go back to, I keep thinking, okay, this is not right. I think let's not do it. So even if it's something which has gotten over 5 years ago, but it's the way you get invested in it, and you can't sort of extract yourself out of it. You still keep sort of figuring out what is best for it or not, or what, In a home also, if I go to somebody's home, which we've done, I start putting the cushions. No,
even the ones you've not done, I'm sure the interior design mindset goes there.
My mind sort of starts figuring out what is not okay with this place, What would I do to set it right? So any place I go to, my first thought, whether it is a restaurant or a home or an office or a lobby or any place, my first instinct is to mentally set it right. Whether the colors are off the tone.
Right as per your...
As per my
but does that take away from your experience?
From enjoying a place.
Yeah, because, you walk into a certain place, someone likes it, but it's not sitting well in your eyes or in your mind. Does it take away from that experience?
But it's a professional hazard.
No, I see. If I see wood, my whole mind goes into which wood this is and where it must have come from and what have you done with
So
it,
like
right?
when there's a table, I instinctively put my hand below it because I want to see how it is finished below.
Oh,
That
yeah.
talks about the quality of the table, you
Yeah.
know. So I'm just saying these
Yeah.
are just professional hazards,
Yeah.
and I look at the lighting. I look at, I mean, all sorts of things. So for me, I start analyzing a space the moment I get into it.
Yeah. Shali, wonderful. I think let's wrap up. I think thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful pleasure speaking to both of you. And I think we could have just gone on and on and on for hours because the amount of experience and content that both of you have and the passion that you have for this space is just absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for coming on to my show.
Thank you. Our
Pleasure's
pleasure.
all ours.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.